Hi, everybody. Welcome back. It's your favorite professor, Dr. T. So, I just want to give you some instruction and some lecturing on the content of your homework. So, I created a module with just the PowerPoint. I may move them around and move them around into the weeks. If I get a chance to do that, you'll find these PowerPoints there as well. So your first homework has 3.1 in it. So part A does not have the solutions, but part B does. Okay? So so when you click on it, you can make it bigger and you can see that in this section you are talking about simplifying expressions and combining like terms, addition and subtraction properties of equality, multiplication and division properties of equality, and solving equations with multiple steps. Okay. So this goes up to 3.4, but then 3.5 is in a different homework. I think that's in homework number 3. But you can click around, so for instance, when we talk about the concepts of 3.1, identifying like terms, commutative, associative, and distributive properties, combining those like terms, and then simplifying expressions. Keep in mind that when you are navigating through the PowerPoints or the textbook, what you need to learn how to do, which Alex is designed to teach you, is to remember what you learned. So writing in your notebook is really important. And then understanding the connection between things like the definition and how it applies to what you are doing. And I'm not saying that you should memorize the definition, but you should understand. And I think a lot of people have difficulty with algebra because they're not making the connection from one thing to the next and or are not understanding the definitions. So here it says a term is a number or the product or quotient of numbers and variables. So what does that look like? Well, an algebraic expression is the sum of one or more terms. What does that look like? So you can jump to example 1 and see that. Okay? So you're going to list the terms of the expression, identify the coefficient of each term, which two terms are like terms, and are the terms at the bottom like terms. Okay? And I will just say that D, they're not like terms, right? Because there is a square here. There's no square on the X here, but there is a square on the Y, but not one here. Okay. So listing the terms, identifying the coefficient real quick. The number that is in front of the letter is the coefficient. Okay. So you can go through those. So now I'm going to switch to your book. So here's your textbook. And we're going to look at the same section. Okay. So here you have the same thing like your PowerPoint. And then you have a little bit more, right? So you have a video. You can look at that video. So you have a video. So you have a section video. Here you have a workbook. If you did purchase your workbook, you can move along through the workbook with the video. And then here's the definition again. A term is a number a term is a number or the product of a quotient of numbers and variables. And then here's an example. These examples are also in the PowerPoint. But I like books and I recommend that you read your book. Okay. So then you have a tip here. You have examples of terms. Okay. The coefficient of those terms. Okay. And then you have some examples of like terms and unlike terms. It is really important. Okay, so here in example 1, you have listed terms of the expression. These are the same questions as the PowerPoint. Do you see? So these also have the solutions. So go through them, right? And then you have some skill practice. So let's practice. list the terms of the expression. And you can go ahead and list them, right? We have negative 48y to the fifth. We have 8y to the second. We have y, and we could technically say negative 8. And then you just click on it. And there you go. Okay. List the coefficient of each term. So negative 48, y, negative 1, and negative 8. Are the terms 5x and x-like terms? Yes, they are. Now, we don't usually write the 1 in front of the x. Okay, so yes. And are the terms negative 6a to the third, b to the second, and a to the third, b to the second like terms? Yes, they are. All right, so here we have, and you can also click here to move on. All right, so if you click here, you can get through all of this. All right, so that's another way you can move on. You can click that over there. So the commutative, associative, and distributive properties, I'm not going to read them to you, but just understand that the reason why we learn these properties is to model whatever it is that we do in algebra. So you see they have a plus b. Well, they have negative 4 plus 7. That means a is negative 4 and b is 7. And if I rewrite that backwards, I'm going to get the same result. Now, a can also be another letter. It could be a variable. So that is what they're trying to express here. And then the multiplication property and then the commutative property of multiplication. Okay. So make sure you read through those. If you have trouble, associative properties, the way I think about the associative property is by grouping. So if I change the grouping, then my result still should be the same. Okay, so it says here does not affect the sum, does not affect the product. The distributive property just means that I'm distributing something from the outside to the inside, usually. Okay, and then you practice. So use those examples to practice. Gonna move on to combining like terms. So combining like terms means that whatever operation that I have to perform, adding or subtracting, I am going to combine those terms. So if you have trouble, and students start to have trouble here in the history of me teaching, this is where students start to have trouble. So make sure you write these down if you have any trouble with understanding like terms, and then practice and see how you do. And then adding and subtracting more like terms. Okay. So moving along. Simplifying expressions. Please, please, please remember that when you are combining all these different things that you have learned already, so please remember that when you are starting to combine all these things that you have learned, right, you must pay attention to the parentheses. Be very careful. Know when you're multiplying, know when you're adding and subtracting. They can be tricky. Okay. You may need to rewrite after you perform some indicated operations, but making sure that you take your time. And when it comes to studying, I find that no matter what you do, especially in college, you have to teach yourself, and you have to teach it and have a conversation with yourself in a way that you understand it. Does not have to be my way. And then you just do some skill practice with that. And then there's a review. And then you have an activity. This will be all of the topics that we discussed. And then your practice, you can choose to do that, move on to wherever it connects to the next section, or you can just work on your homework. Moving on to 3.2. And remember, these examples are also in the PowerPoint. But now simplifying is not the same thing as solving, okay? So we start to look at the definition of a linear equation, which just means that the highest exponent is 1 on the variable, okay? So just go through that, read that. But then when you are learning how to solve equations, one of the coolest things about solving equations is that you can check your answer. So if I say that x is equal to 7, I can plug 7 back in and say, is 7 equal to 7? Yes, it is. If I solve for z here, I'm going to subtract 3 from both sides, right? And then I'm going to plug 5 in and say 5 plus 3 is equal to 8. Yes, that's true. Okay. And then it looks like they're doing guess and checking here. I'm not a big fan of guessing and checking. So I say dive right into using those properties of equality to solve equations. Okay. And then just go through these examples. Okay. I don't need to read these to you. You can do these on your own. So definition of a linear equation in one variable, let a, b, and c be numbers such that a does not equal 0. So ax plus b equals c, that's just a form, right? It just means that, like I said before, that the variable x has an implied exponent of 1, not squared, not cubed, right? Just 1. So the variable stands alone. And then go through these properties of equality again. Remember that these represent numbers. Okay. So it says if A equals B, then A plus C equals B plus C, and so on. Okay. And then they have an example here showing how you have to balance equations. They have to be balanced. So if you have any difficulty with solving equations, first remember that it is not just simplifying. Now you are combining things, like you simplify, you combine like terms, and then you solve. Okay. Be careful with negatives. If you have trouble with that, you can use Khan Academy. You can do all kinds of things to practice and then do the skill practice. Okay. Subtraction property of equality. Just be careful about your signs. They do matter. The order matters. Negatives matter. So just be careful. So here, if I'm subtracting 11 from both sides, I don't want to write 11 and then minus 14. I want to do 14 minus 11. So be careful about that. And then you can do your skill practice, and then you can combine it all together. Let's move on to the multiplication properties of equality. Same thing. You are just going to read the definition and apply that definition, right? So now if I have a number, A equals B, right? So that means 2 equals 2. And then if I have another number, let's say 4. So 4 times 2 is equal to 4 times 2. Okay. And then if I divide it, so 2 divided by 4 equals 2 divided by 4. That's all it means. It's just a property of equality. So here, really quick, if I divide both sides by 3, then I have to make sure that I divide 3x by 3 and 12 by 3. Okay. So just keep that in mind. And then if I divide something into itself, it's 1. And yes, this looks like a fraction, but this really means 3 divided by 3 equals 1. And negative 5 divided by 5 equals 1. Okay. So by all means, go through these. Okay. I did several problems in your homework, so you don't need me to walk you through that. And then when you get to 3.4, we're just doing equations with multiple steps. Okay. And again, if you want to use the PowerPoint, if you need to use the videos, do whatever you need to do. But here we have, okay, so here we have 2x minus 3 equals 15. So what I see when I look at an equation like this, I know I need to add 3 and divide by 2. I know that looking right at it. That's what I need to do. Sometimes they're a little longer and you need to think a little harder, but the same thing here, I'm going to subtract 7 and I'm going to divide by 3. Okay, right away. So just practice. Go through the examples. When I learned algebra, what I did was every example in the book. That's what I did. And I kept practicing until I was confident that I could solve equations. And then I also use the checking method, right? So here we end up with y equals 12. Well, they have 12 equals y. It doesn't matter if you write it y equals 12. And then they substitute it in for the letter y here. And you have the instructions right there. Okay. So let me know if you'd like to see me do something in particular in the comments. And as always, thank you for watching. See you next time.